on all of this. It gives you analysis, it gives you slideshows, gives you video, and lets you get a real sense of what's going at your own pace. You'll find it all at iraq.msnbc.com. Now let's check in with MSNBC's Alex Witt at MSNBC's Listening Post with reports and reaction to this war from around the world.
All right, got you covered there for us. Certainly can't be good news in Washington tonight, everybody. Reports from Turkish television of some 1,000 Turkish soldiers crossing into northern Iraq. Government officials there assert they have no designs on Iraq territory, but say they do seek to contain any refugee flow caused by the war. The Yemen Times leads with the tragic story of an 11-year-old boy and 3 others who were killed today during anti-war protests in that country's capital city. The violence erupted after police blocked some 3,000 demonstrators from marching on the U.S. embassy. And calling the military action in Iraq a, quote, mindless act of the USA and a war against our civilization, the Asian Tribune carries a statement from the Hong Kong-based Asian Human Rights Commission today, which levels charges of sheer colonialism against the United States. And the Kuwait news agency is reporting that UN Security Council member Germany, which publicly spoke out against military disarmament of Iraq, Germany has now sent 100 German soldiers with special training in chemical weapons defense to Kuwait today, and that brings the total number of WMD specialists there to more than 200 now. That is the news as it stands from the MSNBC Listening Post at this hour for us. Send it on back to you.
Thank you very much, Alex Witt. By the way, some of the latest information about Turkey that is coming across the transom right now. A lot of people have been worried about those forces that have moved across the border, 1,500 of them, 5,000 that might be coming along beyond that. The U.S. worried that they might want to drive down to the oil fields in Mosul and Kirkuk. Turkey's foreign minister has now said that they have no territorial ambitions. They simply want to be able to control Iraqi refugees if they start moving across the border. They've always been worried about that. Whether that is so or not, of course, U.S. officials will be keeping a very close eye on those troops that are a complicating factor. Now, moving up from the south, in fact, the group that first punched a hole across the demilitarized zone was the 3rd Infantry Division, heavy armor, and they are driving fast toward Baghdad. They have been rolling now for far more than a day, and NBC's David Bloom is what some people are calling an embedded reporter, and he's been rolling right along with them, and we thought we'd like to give you a look at just what it's been like for him.
They're calling it Route Hurricane through the southern Iraqi desert because obviously this is a very fast-moving force by traditional military standards, but it's still a long train, if you will, a long convoy, thousands of vehicles. Essentially what we're doing is we're rumbling along north in the general direction of Baghdad with the 3rd ID. We're not saying where we are, we're not saying how far we've traveled, because that information is obviously secure and not something that these commanders want to give out. What you're looking at right now is some of these vehicles are breaking down as they roll along these bouncy roads, and so they stop and they're having to repair them. When we first crossed in, what they did was they first spent about a half an hour hitting 2 Iraqi observation posts with artillery because they needed to, frankly, wipe out those observation posts so that they could not relay a message back to Baghdad and let them know the whereabouts, the lanes that those U.S. forces were crossing in. They met only light opposition there. When we crossed the Iraqi berm about 2 hours or so later, all we saw was the smoking remains of those observation posts. But as the last few hours, we've been in what was a battle zone in the first Gulf War, what these soldiers called Gulf 1 as compared to Gulf 2. So we saw a lot of burnt out Iraqi tanks, a lot of unexploded American ordnance, including cluster bombs. The only people that we've seen all day long were some Bedouins, the basically nomad people. And you can see some of these children and women just waving to us as we pass along. We had 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and that's been about it. But, you know, as these soldiers will tell you, the adrenaline tends to keep them pumped up and keep us pumped up. They're drinking a lot of coffee, I can tell you that. But so far, for this huge division, 20,000 soldiers, it's been smooth sailing.
He is driving on now toward Baghdad. One British military spokesman said he believed that if the pace continues as it is, even though there may be some resistance past Al-Nasiriyah and driving on across the Euphrates toward Baghdad, in 3 or 4 days, as they put it in military terms, Baghdad will be invested, that is to say, surrounded and isolated. And at that point, the question of how Fortress Baghdad will be brought down will eventually be answered. We have been paying a lot of attention to the military issues throughout the day, and obviously that is what is before us right now. But we cannot lose sight of the fact that at the end of the day, it is how this plays internationally that is going to be absolutely critical to the success of the operation for the United States. Now, back in August, a prominent Republican and a man who had served President Bush I well, a man named Lawrence Eagleburger, and you may recall that he was a former Secretary of State, said that he was concerned about how things were moving forward. Well, I asked him, now that we have engaged, how does he feel about issues now? Let's listen.
I've never been against the war. In fact, I think we should do it. I thought we should for a long time. What I was worried about at the beginning and thought we should have done differently was not emphasize so much the unilateral aspect of it and not run around thumping our chests, as in particularly the Vice President did, talking about nuclear weapons without any proof and so forth.
Well, sir, I must say that there are an awful lot of people who feel that that has exactly what has continued ever since you first said it.
Well, no, I think when the President finally went to the Security Council and gave his speech, 3 months ago, I think now, I can't precisely tell you when, where he listed the Security Council resolutions that had been violated and so forth, that made me feel a good bit better. But I need to make one other point, which is, while I thought we set the wrong tone and that was likely to cause a good bit of international reaction, I must tell you now, after having watched this for some time, we could have stood on our heads in Lafayette Park and done anything else we wanted to, the best diplomacy in the world, and we were not going to convince most of the rest of the world that this was a good idea. We are now the world's only superpower, and under those circumstances, I have long since decided, particularly with the French acting the way they did, that we were not going to be able to convince most of the rest of the world that this was a wise thing to do, particularly when it was going to be done by the United States. And under those circumstances, the attitudes of the rest of the world at this stage, if I may be blunt about it, we couldn't have changed them, and we were going to have to do this unilaterally. I wish we had started out making it much clearer that we were going to try to get everybody to understand what we were doing and agreeing with us, but if we had done it all the best way in the world, we would still never have convinced the rest of the world that this was the thing to do.
Well, let's set the table. Here's where we are right now. Militarily, it seems to be proceeding remarkably well.
Very well.
Nevertheless, here in the United States, there are growing protests in the region. There are growing protests. Turkey has begun its incursion. Some 1,500 troops. We are told that it could, another 5,000 could be poised there. We don't know exactly what their intentions are. Do you have diplomatic concerns at this point?
Do I have diplomatic concerns? I'll tell you what, if we win this war, as we will relatively soon, I think, if we can demonstrate to the rest of the world that we have found what I think we will find and what we have contended we know is there, and we show that to the rest of the world, it won't solve all of the problems that we have seen develop. It should persuade those who are persuadable, those who are reasonable, that we were right in the first place. The rest of the world is not going to be convinced, and it will be a difficult time getting through this. And the most important and most critical question will be, how well do we handle the post-war rebuilding of Iraq? And that's going to be a very, very tough problem for us. We're going to have to stay there for some period of time, and that we aren't going to like much. But if we do that well, and if we come out with a more or less democratic Iraq, and I say if we can do that, over time I think we will have proved to the rest of the world that our intentions were correct, that we succeeded in building a new and far better Iraq, and I think under those circumstances, over a period of time, we will probably come out of most of this with most of our reputation repaired, but it's going to take a long time, and there are a lot of ifs on the process.
There are indeed a lot of ifs, and the question is how they are going to win this war. That is what is right in front of the military planners at this point. The post-war questions they are dealing with, they are thinking about now. They have to preset, but it is a question of winning first. Now, the 101st Airborne is being held in abeyance. They're a reserve that's being held back by Tommy Franks, who's the commander-in-chief of CENTCOM right now. He's going to start moving them forward before long. Still, they're back in Kuwait. They're called the Screaming Eagles, and they are specialists in being able to move into urban fighting. If it comes to that, you can expect to see the 101st Airborne involved. Embedded with the 101st is our own Dana Lewis, and earlier I talked with him about how things have been faring for them.
Forrest, you know, right now we've just been through a little rainstorm here, believe it or not, and the wind has picked up, but the visibility seems okay, which is very important for those Apache attack helicopters, as you know. Today, some of the first members of the 101st started to cross the border and go into Iraq. It was the 3rd Brigade, and there are 3 brigades altogether. That's the 1st Brigade to cross, and what we understand that they are doing is setting up forward refueling points so that the Apaches will then be able to go forward. They will be closer to Baghdad. They will be able to stay on station longer to attack Iraqi targets. Earlier today, we had yet another one of these missiles launched at us from southern Iraq. There have been about 8 over the last 2 days, and they have been coming from mobile launchers in the south part of the country, and it's been very frustrating for U.S. forces, including very likely special forces, to try and locate them and shut them down. The last launch, we're told, however, was not launched into Kuwait, where we are, but it was actually likely launched at U.S. forces on the move in southern Iraq. And for the last few hours, I'd say for the last 5 hours now, Forrest, it has been quiet. There have been no alarms going off, no incoming missiles. So it may be that whoever was operating those launchers have either abandoned them or in fact have moved them further north, waiting for a different opportunity to strike American forces. Back to you, Forrest.
They certainly are mobile, and they are hard to find sometimes. But to put this in perspective, there was a lot of speculation about whether Iraq would use chemical weapons at this stage in the fighting. And my bet, at least, was that they would not, simply because world opinion would turn so staunchly against them. And what we seem to have now are, I guess it's seersuckers that are coming across, which are not much more than flying tin cans and not particularly effective.
That's right, no guidance systems at all, and lucky for us, I mean, they're landing in the desert, and in most cases they have been, according to the U.S. military, intercepted by the Patriot anti-missile batteries. They have taken them out, and at least 3 of them in the last 24 hours have landed very close to where we're standing. You know, Forrest, I've asked the intelligence people here about their assessment of the likelihood that they will use biological or chemical weapons, and they still believe, despite the fact he hasn't used it so far, they believe that it is very likely he will attempt to use it. They are certainly planning for that. They believe that as U.S. forces get closer to Baghdad and try to enter the city, that is the trigger for the use of chemical and biological weapons to try and slow down the advancing army. You know, they would be happy if it is proven that they're wrong, but they believe that he still has the capability and still has the will, and that Saddam's forces will try to launch on them as they get close to Baghdad.
As ever, they must plan for the worst. I am right out of time, Dana, but I am assuming that you will be moving north shortly after those positions have been preset.
We will be moving forward with them. It's going to be a long positioning into Iraq, and then we'll start to get missions once we're in there.
Dana Lewis, who is with the 101st, and they will be driving on toward Baghdad, following behind the 3rd Infantry Division. Bottom of the hour, let's bring you the latest at this minute. The Turkish government has finally granted the U.S. overflight rights. Now, this allows for shorter flights into Iraq for the planes on the USS Harry Truman and USS Theodore Roosevelt. It is a lot less than the United States had wanted. They wanted to be able to stage troops, and they wanted refueling rates, did not get them. Turkey has sent what we are told is about 1,500 troops to Iraq. Light forces at this point, it appears. They say they have no territorial ambitions at all. It is to prevent Iraqi Kurds from coming across the border, controlling that, and they are most particularly concerned about the attempts to form an independent state because Turkey has quite a number of Kurds of their own. U.S. officials confirming Saddam Hussein was wounded in the attack on his compound Wednesday. Confirming it, but the extent of his injuries are not known, they say. Right now, Saddam Hussein's old palace compound, one of his much beloved ones, right there in the center of the city, is no more. It is simply smoldering, one of many sites damaged by that huge assault of 320 cruise missiles that came over in such a very short time, actually rebuilding the entire area along the bank of the river where all those government buildings are. And now, the streets of Baghdad are silent. They are empty. Fires continue to burn. Others are smoldering from that ferocious attack today. Now, we do remind you, we recap the latest headlines on the Iraq crisis every 15 minutes at the top of the hour, 15 after, 30 after, and 45 after the hour here on MSNBC. Let's check in now for the latest military update in the war in Iraq. Retired Marine Major Jack Stradley's in our war room, and it looks like they're just kind of throwing a few things at them just to kind of keep them on their toes in Baghdad right now, Jack.
Well, Forrest, I think you're right. We're starting to see the daylight attacks of cruise missiles in Baghdad. Probably what that's an indication of is the stepped-up pace of bombings that we're going to see there. Last night in Baghdad was the first night of the shock and awe. Hundreds of Tomahawk cruise missiles, B-2 bombers dropping bombs, and now there's a target list to prosecute, and the pace has to pick up. That's why we're probably going to see more and more daylight, at least Tomahawk missile strikes over Baghdad and around the country of Iraq.
Well, it's an intriguing problem that they're facing right now. I suppose what they have to do is keep that rhythm moving along. During the day, obviously, they have to worry about anti-aircraft fire, although they don't with missiles. They seem to want to do it at night. They do love the night.
Well, the fighter pilots, bomber pilots prefer to fly at night. A lot of the Iraqi air defense is optically guided, so the night is the friend of the Allied fighter pilots. But like I said, the cruise missiles can be fired during the day without putting a pilot's life at risk, and we need to pick up the pace to go ahead and hit those targets over the next couple of days before the 3rd Infantry Division gets up to Baghdad.
Well, Major, you're a Marine. I would assume that you don't believe that this can be won by air power alone. You're going to have to get some boots in there, huh?
Absolutely right, Forrest. We have to put that infantryman on the ground to take that terrain. So we're beginning to see that happen around Basra. We see the armored column moving up towards Baghdad, probably be interacting with the Republican Guard here in the next day or two, couple of days. We'll see where it goes from there.
You know, I got a couple of pieces of information that were awfully interesting to me. One is the London Times is reporting that some Brits, some commandos had come across a bunker in which some commanders of, I think it might have been the 51st, I'm not entirely sure, had been piled up dead and shot by their conscripts who simply did not want to go into fighting. There's that. And there, of course, is this news that the 11th Infantry Division of Iraq, again, regular forces, has surrendered. Now, that's interesting because they're really based in An-Nasiriyah, which is there by the Euphrates, and that controls that entryway. So this might allow the 3rd ID to move a lot faster toward Baghdad than they otherwise might have.
You're absolutely right, Forrest. With the 11th Infantry Division surrendering en masse, or at least that's the reports we're getting, the 3rd ID is moving unimpeded now north towards Baghdad.
How long do you anticipate it'll go?
Well, it's hard to tell right now. The reports that are being promulgated are that they're at least 100 miles into the Iraqi desert. Could be a lot further than that. I think it'll be another 24 or 36 hours before they start the approaches to Baghdad.
You know, there are an awful lot of people who have gotten very excited about how things have gone so far, and they've gone so smoothly, but I don't know anyone who really anticipated that it would be difficult to drive north. I mean, this is just regular forces, and they would love to quit. They don't need to fight at all. It's really when you get up toward Baghdad, where the Special Republican Guard is, that you're going to find out whether they'll stand and fight or not.
Well, that's what we're holding our breath for, Forrest. The Special Republican Guard in those concentric rings around Baghdad, protecting the gates to the palace, are the main concern. It's always been our concern. But, of course, this strategic strike a couple of days ago the supposed confusion in the command structure in Iraq. With any luck, that confusion, that psychological operation may lead us to the point where we may not have to fight. We may not have to go toe-to-toe with the Republican Guard. Hopefully it'll be, we can hope that it'll be an easier fight than we might have anticipated.
Well, Jack Stradley, Marine Major, thank you for talking with us, and from your lips to God's ears, it is much to be hoped that this command structure is in disarray, as Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld has suggested. We do know that conversations have been going on, but clearly not well enough for them to stop the shock and awe strategy that they have been applying, and that is likely to continue to be applied as we move on through the night. We will be watching that very carefully. That is when we will find out whether the Battle of Baghdad is going to be called for. We pause for a moment. And a very good morning to our stations on the East Coast, on the West Coast. A late evening to you, our affiliates joining us now. We are covering what is going on in Iraq and in the region. Now, you might say that there is a lull that has fallen now. There have been a few strikes in Baghdad on this early morning, about 8:37 in the morning there. But for the most part, that shock and awe attack that we saw on Friday night has paused. We will likely see it pick up in mass later on this evening. This is a shot of Baghdad as we see it right now, and it is deceptively calm. You remember how those government buildings, how the presidential palace, how all of that riverbank was literally rebuilt by 320 cruise missiles that came smashing in. The 3rd Infantry Division is driving up toward Baghdad just as quickly as they can. They're trying to make a 400-mile run where they will, in military terms, invest Baghdad. That is to say that they will surround it, and they will isolate it, and then they will find out if there has to be a Battle of Baghdad. In the meantime, Turkish troops have moved down across the border, about 1,500 of them at this point, light infantry troops. We are told that possibly another 5,000 might be joining them. This is of real concern to the United States. The United States did not want those forces in there, particularly if they were not under the control of U.S. command. Nevertheless, Turkey has moved on in. The Turkish foreign minister just a few minutes ago said that the Turks have no territorial ambitions. They are just concerned about refugees. By that, you can read that they are concerned about the Kurds. The Kurds have always wanted a free Kurdistan. There are many, many Kurds in Turkey. Turkey remains very nervous about that, and they are putting boots on the ground to make sure that things work well. Basra, that key port city, British and American forces have been moving toward that very quickly. It is not yet in their control, however, Qasr is, and we are told that the critical Rumaila oil fields, that's 60 kilometers long and 10 kilometers wide, it's a lot, is in U.S. control. But remember, some 7 to 10 oil wells have been set afire, and that's going to require contractors coming in to take care of that. So that's where matters stand at this point on the ground. Let's check in with Jeannie Ohm, who is at the Pentagon right now and has been following events throughout the evening. And of course, the key question that everybody wants to wonder about, Jeannie, with that first strike that started this war to everyone's surprise, coming raining in, now we know, on Saddam Hussein's head. Apparently he was wounded, we are being told. Just how much did that disrupt command and control for the Iraqi forces?
Absolutely, Forrest. In fact, although a senior U.S. official is telling us that Saddam Hussein was wounded, bottom line, they still don't have a really good assessment whether or not he was killed or any of his sons or other senior Iraqi leadership. But in the words of one official, some pretty important people are in some pretty bad shape. But at this point, again, they cannot pinpoint exactly who may have been hurt and what the situation is at this hour. But Secretary Rumsfeld made it very clear that they are seeing strong indications that Saddam Hussein's regime is losing control of the country. Why? Because they know they've taken out several of the communication structures and various other command and control facilities all throughout Iraq. You know, the past 2 nights, what we really did see were sort of a preview. The first night that we actually saw airstrikes in Baghdad, that was really a target of opportunity to go after Saddam Hussein. But really what we saw about 12 hours ago was the major thrust of the air campaign. What Pentagon officials have been telling us for a week, what we would unmistakably recognize as the shock shock and awe campaign. We can tell you we have more information exactly about the firepower used. We do know about 1,000 cruise missiles, both launched from the sea and air, were used in this raid, as well as hundreds of precision-guided bombs, including JDAMs and about 2,000-pound bunker busters. Now, in all, they struck about 1,500 aim points. It's important to identify that this doesn't mean 1,500 different targets. A building can have several different aim points involved, but that's a sheer number alone. And here's another interesting fact. Every type of aircraft in the Air Force arsenal was used in this, including several B-2 bombers. Some even flew all the way from Whiteman Air Force Base, making that 34-hour round trip. But we're also getting a better picture now, Forrest, that military officials are telling us that the pilots reported heavy defenses, meaning Iraqis did fire surface-to-air missiles at them, as well as anti-aircraft artillery, the AAAs. But at this point, military officials say that no strike aircraft were lost in that raid. We also have more information regarding the Navy warplanes. Here's an interesting fact. They actually took off from all 5 aircraft carriers positioned, 2 in the eastern Mediterranean, the rest in the Gulf. Here's what's interesting. The Turkey situation with the overflight rights at this hour, it's still not resolved. In fact, there was one point when Navy warplanes, they took off from the eastern Mediterranean. They were called back before they got into Turkish airspace. So what we're told is, yes, they were involved, but instead they had to take a much longer route to hit targets in Iraq. Forrest?
I suspect it has something to do with Turkish domestic politics and some of that Islamic party that has been so resistant to all of this. It is an intriguing problem that the U.S. is facing, trying to figure out exactly how they're going to be able to move forward with this. They want to talk to them. They would like this regime to step down, but it seems quite clear that they are not satisfied that whoever they're talking with has sufficient authority to be able to surrender, because they're hammering them awful hard. So there's a kind of carrot and stick that's going on.
And Forrest, you know, we should talk about the fact that so far to date there have been numerous Iraqi soldiers that have surrendered, or in the words of some officials, they've just abandoned their positions and, quote, melted away. But at this point, this is part of the regular Iraqi military, not Saddam Hussein's elite Republican Guard that are closer in Baghdad. We should also mention the status of the ground forces right now. As of several hours ago, coalition forces were more than 100 miles inside Iraq, and we're told right now that they're making big inroads toward Basra, the important strategic city in southern Iraq, and that according to officials, it's not ours definitely yet, but that is something they are very encouraged by so far. But General Myers, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he did have a caution for the troops. Because so far they've only met scattered resistance, he doesn't want them to get a sense of being too complacent or overconfident, because they might face their heaviest fighting yet. But of course, we need to remind viewers that 2 Marines were killed in combat on Friday in 2 separate incidents when they faced fire in southern Iraq. Forrest?
Jeannie Ohm, thank you very much, Jeannie. And along with that, of course, we all remember that CH-46 Sea Knight helicopter that went down as it was transporting 4 Marines and some British commandos, 12 British commandos, or 8 British commandos, or a total of 12. So those are the casualties that we have seen. Now, we are showing you a lot of pictures. We are talking about the 3rd Infantry Division. We're talking about the things that we've seen, the things that we know, and most particularly we're showing you pictures of airstrikes on Baghdad. But do not be deceived. This is not the sum of the war by a long shot. It's really the tip of the iceberg. In actual fact, some of the most critical moves in this war we do not know about at this point. We are not hearing about. We do not have pictures. I'll give you an example. Special Forces and Special Operations Group teams have been in and around Iraq, and in fact in Baghdad for quite some time. Some of them, it is believed, have actually been in there for months. They have been operating throughout western Iraq for a very long time. It's entirely possible, and I speculate here, but I think with some reason, it's entirely possible that Special Forces teams, military teams who are trained to make contact, have been inside Baghdad developing intelligence, and that could be a help in arranging the kinds of contacts that we have been hearing about through Defense Secretary Rumsfeld. There's a lot going on under the surface. That's why this is a very different kind of war. They are certainly using shock and awe in the military sense. They are certainly striking them hard. But in another sense, it's a psychological game. They are using that as a way to drive them down, as a way to force them to realize that fighting is essentially useless and that they should surrender. We do want to take you through the latest headlines. It is the quarter of the hour. British forces are saying they hope to take Iraq's second largest city, that's Basra. That's important because it'll close the back door and provide security as they drive up north toward Baghdad. And they say that it shows signs of crumbling command and control. In fact, coalition commanders say that they've got 8,000 Iraqi troops surrendering near Basra late yesterday. Let me remind you, as Jeannie Ohm says, don't take too much into that. Those are Iraqi regular forces. These guys are, as far as Saddam is concerned, cannon fodder. They're just regular forces, poorly trained, poorly armed, poorly fed, poorly clothed, and they are thrilled to be able to just quit without ever fighting. Later on, when we get toward the Republican Guard, we're going to see what this actually looks like. However, a key Iraqi port is in U.S. hands right now as they move toward Basra. That's Qasr. Now that's critical because you have to think about the post-war period even as you are prosecuting the war itself. You've got to be able to roll this through. And Qasr is going to be critical to the delivery of humanitarian aid. U.S. and British troops moved in there as quickly as they could. And then there are, of course, the oil refineries in that area, in Al-Fad, which is that little peninsula you see down there in the bottom. And they drove on up to the southern oil fields, something they knew they had to do very quickly to prevent destruction there. That oil is going to be terribly important for paying for the rebuilding of Iraq. We know that a number of the fields, possibly somewhere between 7 and 10, have been set on fire. Now, American casualties, 2 killed today in contact. 2 Marines died fighting in the south. They did pick up some resistance down there. And of course, 4 killed overnight in that helicopter crash in Kuwait. 8 British Royal Marines dying in that crash as well. Some conflicting information about what might have actually caused that crash. Some people say it was the weather. Remember, these sandstorms have been kicking up. Bad for helicopters. Others say it might have been the smoke from the oil fires themselves that caused some disorientation. But I think they're going to have to sort through that and try to actually get some harder information. We remind you, we recap the latest headlines on the Iraq crisis for you every 15 minutes. We do it at the top of the hour, 15 after, 30 after, 45 after the hour, right here on MSNBC. And you don't have to wait for that. You can go to the web anytime at all. Iraq.msnbc.com. Complete coverage. And they have one of my own personal favorites, the Target Iraq Interactive Library, where you can see analysis and slideshows, and you can check out some of the video at your own discretion. You don't have to wait for us to show it to you. You'll find it all at iraq.msnbc.com. Let us check in now at the MSNBC listening post. Alex Witt is there. She's following reaction from around the world. Alex?
I am indeed, Forrest. Let's go with this, everyone. The Jordan Times reports tonight that more than 13,000 Arab nationals have crossed the border from Iraq into Jordan. All this since just Wednesday, all of them fleeing the attack on Iraq. And the majority of those leaving, they are Sudanese and Jordanian. But the director at the Karama border crossing assures citizens they have no immediate plans to close the border there. Then, according to a report in the Jerusalem Post, a senior Lebanese Shiite Muslim cleric who strongly opposed the U.S.-led war in Iraq is nevertheless calling on the Iraqi people to topple Saddam Hussein for, quote, destroying Iraq and throwing the Arab region into disarray. Then out of Japan tonight, strong support from the war on Iraq from the Prime Minister, Junichiro Koizumi, noting that Japan has enjoyed post-World War II peace and prosperity because of the strong U.S.-Japan security alliance. Japan Times, in fact, quotes the Prime Minister as expressing his full support of the United States' actions, and the Asian leader also cites the increasing security threat from North Korea. This is a major reason for his country's cooperation. That is a quick look at the latest from the MSNBC Listening Post at this hour. Back to you, Forrest.
Thank you, Alex. We want to talk about Turkey. It's a problem. A lot of problems along the northern front. Why? A vanguard of Turkish troops has reportedly crossed the Iraqi border, and remember that U.S. forces were not allowed to base out of there. They haven't been given refueling rights, and we learned from Jeannie Ohm that they haven't really gotten the overflight rights yet. Turkey has been a real difficulty because the U.S. wanted to open that northern front, and they wanted to have boots on the ground there to make sure that there were no difficulties between the Turks and the Kurds. You just don't want that fighting to take place. But now there has been an incursion by Turkish troops, so what does it mean? NBC's George Lewis is in Turkey with the latest. And George, you're just the fella I want to talk to. The Turkish foreign minister has now said they have no territorial interests in Iraq. So that, if you take them at their word, rules out the idea of driving on toward the Mosul and Kirkuk oil fields. But still, what a mess if you get fighting going on between Iraqi Kurds and Turks.
Yeah, exactly, Forrest. That's exactly what the Pentagon does not want. Just to orient you, 4 miles behind the mosque in the background here is the Iraqi border. I'm in the town of Silopi. And this is one of the places where the Turks have massed their forces. We're told that there are thousands of them. They've got tanks, they've got artillery, they've got armored personnel carriers around here. And what we're told is that there were incursions along perhaps as many as 3 points along the border to the east of us, that they want to cross in the mountains over routes that refugees have traditionally taken when there's been trouble here. Now, what the Turks say is that they want to control the refugee population. They want to make sure that these people are properly taken care of. But they also are worried about the Kurds, the Kurds who have been operating on both sides of the Turkish-Iraqi border. Back in 1991, at the end of Desert Storm, when there was sort of a power vacuum in northern Iraq, these Kurdish rebels used the opportunity to hit targets in Turkey. The Turks say they don't want a repeat of that. But this is a nightmare, a potential nightmare for the Pentagon, because they want U.S. control of northern Iraq. There are already U.S. forces operating with the Kurdish forces on the other side of Iraq, preparing the way for U.S. ground troops to land at air bases there. They don't want a squabble between the Turks and the Kurds at this juncture. A war within a war would not help the U.S. effort to topple Saddam Hussein. So we all stand by and wait to see what happens. The U.S. has repeatedly warned Turkey not to probe deeper into Iraqi territory. There are Turkish troops patrolling a buffer zone in northern Iraq, just on the other side of the border. What the U.S. doesn't want is more and more Turkish troops piling over that border and going deeper into northern Iraq. Forrest?
Well, I'll tell you, there's some interesting things that are developing here. You're a far better historian than I am, George, so you know that as far as those wonderful oil fields around Mosul and Kirkuk, they were once part of the Ottoman Empire, and Turkey has been casting a lusting eye toward them for a long time. Now, I wonder if the confident things the U.S. is saying are belied by the fact that they have timed the attacks on Baghdad along with some significant air attacks around Kirkuk and Mosul, which would suggest that they're softening those up as quickly as they can so that they can get some troops in there. But the problem is, since they were disallowed the use of the troops to get the 4th Infantry coming in from Turkey, they're going to have to shuttle the 82nd Airborne up in choppers from Kuwait. That's a long ride. It's a painful, slow ride, and it's light infantry. It's guys with M4s. And you just mentioned that they've got a lot of armor along that border. So the truth of the matter is, it's going to be diplomacy that's going to stop the Turks. It is not going to be military muscle.
Well, I think Washington is going to have to convince Turkey that it will pay a horrible price if it tries to take the oil fields. Mosul is about 120 miles behind my shoulder here, so it's fairly close, and there are a lot of Turkish troops along this border. The scenario that nobody wants is for them to start heading south toward those oil fields. In addition to the 82nd Airborne that would be brought in to helicopters, we've also got the possibility that the Kurdish rebels working with the U.S. Green Berets and other forces in that area will be able to open up the northern Iraqi airstrips so that planes, perhaps using Turkish airspace, can also fly in other U.S. troops. We just have to wait and see how this is going to play out for us.
Yeah, but we don't want to make more of this than it is. It's just a pain in the neck for the United States. But the truth is, there are a lot of punishments that they could offer to Iraq economically and politically, and they could try to keep them out of the European Union. They could do a lot of things that would make it more painful for Turkey to cause a problem than any kind of benefit that they might get, I would think.
Well, there's been a long history of cooperation between U.S. and Turkish military forces. So in addition to the diplomatic discussions that are going on between embassies and the State Department and the Turkish Foreign Ministry, there are also obviously contacts going on at the military level to try to persuade the Turks to kind of cool it in northern Iraq and let the U.S. war plans play out there.
It'll be interesting to watch. You've got a good seat to see an intriguing development. George Lewis in Turkey. Thanks for talking to us, George. And once again, just to remind you, 1,500 troops have already gone across the border. Some 5,000 more are expected to move in there, and the rest will sit along the border, and we will see what happens. Once again, 2 Marines died today in southern Iraq. They were part of that force that was moving up to grab Qasr and then head on toward Basra. And we remember that 4 other Marines died when a Sea-Knight helicopter, a transport helicopter, crashed, and they died along with 8 British Royal Marines, commandos. And so there is grief stretching from the Iraqi family all the way back to the United States. Loved ones are troubled by everything that's happened, as you can imagine, and they are joined in sorrow with the families of those 4 Marines who suffered so much. NBC's Jim Avila talks about the troubles at home.
That terrible knock on the door, 3 in the morning, combat 7,000 miles away, brought home to Marine Captain Ryan Beaupre's family.
I don't think he was ever afraid of anything.
The Beaupres say they first got that sick feeling in their stomachs when they saw on television it was a Marine transport helicopter that crashed in the Kuwaiti desert. The same helicopter, the same place where Ryan was flying. Confirmation came within hours. The young man who helped his high school to the state track finals, finished college, worked for an insurance company, and then told his family it was not enough, is among the first to die in the war against Iraq.
He came home and told us that he thought that he could do more as a person, and said that he was going to join the Marine Corps to be a pilot.
When Captain Beaupre went to Kuwait, he told his family it was like a camping trip with gas masks, and believed in his mission.
Ryan believed, as do we, that it's something that needs to be done. So, you know, what better people to do it?
In all, 6 Marines have died, 2 in ground combat, not yet identified, 4 aboard Ryan Beaupre's helicopter, Brian Kennedy from Texas, and Sergeant Kendall Waters Bay from Baltimore. His father stepped outside the family home and spoke directly to the commander-in-chief.
And I want President Bush to get a good look at this. Real good look here. This is the only son I had. Only son.
Another painful message from the mother of Marine Captain Thomas J. Aubin from Maine, glued to the TV watching combat coverage, but dreading every minute.
You've got to take it easy, but it's impossible. That's your son out there, or your daughter.
A war thousands of miles and time zones away, brought home by the faraway deaths of those so close. For most Americans watching the bombing in Baghdad on television, it looks like a movie. But for at least 6 American families tonight, that war is all too real. Jim Avila, NBC News, St. Anne, Illinois.
We have met only a few, but multiply those few by the hundreds of thousands who still worry about the ones who are over there, and you have an understanding of the price that is being paid by the U.S. and British forces. Good morning to you on the East Coast, on the West Coast. Good evening. I'm Forrest Sawyer. We'd like to begin with the latest developments in what the U.S. is calling Operation Iraqi Freedom. Senior U.S. officials are confirming, we've been speculating for a while, they're confirming now that Saddam Hussein was in fact wounded in that attack on his compound Wednesday, the attack opening the war. Here's the rub. They don't know how badly he might have been wounded. Eyewitnesses do say that he was seen being carried out. The number of Americans killed in Operation Iraqi Freedom now totals 6. 2 Marines died fighting in southern Iraq. And of course, we remember the 4 killed overnight in a helicopter crash in Kuwait. And we remember the 8 British Royal Marines who also died in that crash. Air raid sirens have been wailing in Baghdad again. It is daylight there, and there are reports that Allied aircraft have been heard over the Iraqi capital. In fact, just before dawn, the center of the city, where there are so many government buildings, was shaken by a huge explosion. Nobody on the ground to see exactly what was hit, so it's not clear what had been targeted. That's the top of the news. We want to remind you, we do recap the latest headlines on the Iraqi crisis for you every 15 minutes right here on these NBC stations. Now, we have a team of correspondents who are covering the latest developments in the war against Iraq. Of course, at the Pentagon is Jeannie Ohm. Peter Arnett is in Baghdad. David Bloom, we have been seeing so much of him on his way to Baghdad with the Army's 3rd Infantry. David hasn't gotten much sleep recently. And Chip Reed is in southern Iraq.